What makes the achievement of emotional sobriety so difficult is the habits we have, the patterns we have in our behavior, the habitual ways that we've come to think about things. We have to really become aware of those things in order to challenge them, because the consciousness that has created a lot of the problems in our life cannot solve it, cannot change things. So what happens is the first step is waking up. We've been going through and exploring the steps from the perspective of how they facilitate the development of what we're calling an authentic self-esteem, and relating how the development of an authentic self-esteem is related to emotional sobriety. Each week, we begin with one of the four presenters here taking the lead. And tonight, I will be joined here in a moment by Herb Kaighan, who is going to give us an introduction to Step 7. Herb, how are you tonight?
I'm wonderful. I'm looking forward to another session with our panel. It's so fun. We have such a good time. My name is Herb, and I'm an alcoholic. Happy to be here and chat about Step 7. It's interesting listening to Thom, and I made a connection tonight, actually, and he read something I've read many times and I've heard being read many times, and he made a very big point of talking about humility, and it's in the letter on emotional sobriety. And it's interesting to me that the Step 7 begins with humbly. And Step 7 in the 12 and 12 is a wonderful treatise on humility. And Alan made the point to keep us in focus in terms of what we're doing here, that we're looking at the steps in relationship to self-esteem, and we're looking at 6 pillars of self-esteem. And interestingly enough, when I glanced at the book itself, he actually has a 7th pillar at the end of the conclusion of the book, which is willingness. And it so ties wonderfully into Step 7. My experience with Step 7 is that at 4 years of sobriety, I met a man who was a mechanic with the big book, and for the very first time understood that it is a textbook with precise directions in there as to how to apply the steps. But regardless of my education, etc., I was not able to read it on my own, and he was the one that unpacked it, allowing me to see that pathetic Herbie here in the cartoon is in addiction jail, the bondage of addiction, but that the real bondage was the bondage of self, unmanageability. And I didn't know that the 12 steps are a process, a methodology, certainly created to deal with alcohol and then expanded to deal with addiction in the broadest of senses. But my own experience now and perspective on the 12 steps is that it's a human development process for freedom, because it's a process that allows me to develop a relationship with power, those first 3 steps. You could put the word God in there. I didn't. I just used the word power because I think it's the best representative word for what I need, a relationship with power other than myself, to be determined by myself. You could use the term life there with a capital L. You could use the term higher self there. But this process leads us then to steps 4 through 7, which is establishing a relationship with myself. I had no idea I had low self-esteem because I was in the delusion of my grandiosity and bondage of my narcissism. until I did this work. And today I made a connection that I'd never made before. Steps 4 through 5, inventory and full disclosure, that changed my perception. But steps 6 and 7 changed my behavior. Yeah, right. It was an insight I had never had. 39 years sober, doing this work many times, but thinking about what we're going to be talking about tonight. Step 7, humbly asked. That's prayer. Prayer doesn't change God. Prayer changes the prayer by making me more conscious. To remove our shortcomings. In step 6, we saw we're powerless. In step 4, we saw we're powerless. In step 2, we saw ourselves powerless. Each of those even steps, the naming steps. And each of the odd steps, decision steps to take some action. And this action in step 7 is in fact a prayer. It's so simple a step that there's only one paragraph, page 76, the second paragraph in the big book. And the entire paragraph is just a prayer. But it does begin, my Creator, which is an interesting perspective on what we're addressing here. At least my take on it is, oh, this is my structure. This is who I am. I'm built with these instincts. Bill says instincts gone awry. He says self-will run riot. Yes, I've seen that in step 4, and it got confirmed in step 5. And I looked at my step 6 to see how it manifests in my behavior. Step 4 was identifying these obstacles for the very first time. I was embarrassed in my own presence, seeing the delusion of my beliefs, the corruption of my motives. I am not being exaggerating. In fact, I'm understating my embarrassment and my reaction to seeing the truth for the very first time 4 years sober, especially once I disclosed it out loud. Reading my step 4 out loud, which I had accumulated and written over several months, but sitting there reading it to a man who witnessed it, reading it consecutively and out loud, within an hour or two, it washed over me as to not only the embarrassment of the impact of my behavior on myself, but more especially the impact of my behavior on other people. I had never seen it the way I saw it at that moment. And over the weekend, I put a list of character defects together, which were pretty visible, and spent some time in meditation listing them, not to punish me, not to shame me, not to guilt me. No. To identify. So, okay, so what are the moving parts of this machine called Herb? I was willing to have them all removed. I mean, that's what the essence of step 6 is, to remove the shortcomings. I was willing to change. Ask yourself, are you willing to change? Do you accept that you're powerless over your inclination? Are you powerless over your behavior and somewhat responsible for it? These were the two insights that I had at that time. I remember it so clearly, 1988. I went into the room to pray the prayer for the removal of my deep resentments. But I had learned something. I was ready. I believed in the power of God. I knew that this was blocking these character defects, these manifestations of resentment and fear and dishonesty and selfishness, all of the areas that I had looked at in step 4 and their manifestations in my behavior in a variety of ways. I may have had 30 or 40. And I distilled them down to see that, in fact, the exact nature of these were coming out of my instincts, my primal survival instincts of fight, flight, and freeze. These were the obstacles to me, my relationship with myself. I was willing to pray, and I prayed the prayer from the book. The next day, I was very clear that I still had these character defects. I went to a meeting, my men's stag meeting, which is a crosstalk meeting on the steps, and I heard somebody share that they prayed specifically for the removal of a specific character defect. It's not in the book, it's not in the 12 and 12, it hadn't been talked about in the meeting, but this was his experience, and I listened to it because he got free. Prayed specifically for the removal of a specific character defect. Was I willing to do that? Well, I went home and I thought about it for a day or two. Don't want to rush into anything like that. And I went into my room and I shut my door. I didn't want to have anybody in my house. I'm full family, wife and 3 children, teenagers. Don't want to see them on my knees. This man had said, get on your knees to pray the prayer and pray it specifically. We get on our knees not to get God's attention, he said, but to get our own attention, to have a consciousness of what our intention is. We get our attention to our intention. Nice play on words. Spend some time with that. And I went to pray the prayer. And I had to stop because I couldn't pray it specifically for the removal of a specific character defect, because I wasn't willing at all. I was too invested in this behavior. And I paused, remembering the step 6 suggestion that if we're not willing, we pray for the willingness, and I prayed for the willingness. Just a simple prayer. I prayed the prayer from the big book, my creator. I needed to be recreated. And I called the man who took me through the steps, and I told him about, I got on my knees and I wasn't willing, and then I was willing, and then I prayed, and he said, wow, Herb, what a great insight. You discovered that you weren't willing. He said, now stop the behavior. And he gave me a new insight. I'm powerless over the inclination, but I'm 100% responsible for how it manifests in my life. Am I willing to be accountable? He said, this is how it's going to work. You pray every day for the change in your inclination and behavior. And every day you call me and you tell me how you're behaving. Not in the book. It's not in any writing I've ever read, but it was my experience. Within 24 hours, the behavior changed, never returned. Within 24 hours, the behavior changed and it never returned. The inclination stayed with me for 2-3 years. I don't actually remember, it's 30 years ago. But I continued to pray every day specifically for the change, not only in the inclination and the behavior. I called him once a week because it wasn't necessary to call him once a day, and I called him once a month later on. But eventually, even the inclination went away. How free do you want to be? How soon? It's such a powerful formula. I don't know how it works. I do know that it works. And the people who I've shared this experience with, who have embraced the methodology, praying specifically for the removal of a specific character defect and holding themselves accountable to somebody on a regular basis, experience the change. There's 6 characteristics of the pillars that Roger articulated right at the beginning of this process. Consciousness, self-acceptance, self-responsibility, self-assertiveness, purpose, integrity. And that 7th is willingness. I don't believe I need to comment on the tie to self-esteem. It's almost self-evident, but perhaps the panel will talk about the connections. Thanks.
Thank you, Herb. I'm going to bring in the other discussants at this point.
Hi, kids.
Evening.
If we're kids, you must be dad. You must be Pop. Hi, Pop.
That's me. No, I think I'm the young one among us, aren't I? I think I'm the youngest guy here. That's why
At this stage, I don't think we need to pursue this discussion.
Humbly asked him to shut his mouth. Is that it? Was that hold? Did I misread the step tonight? Humbly asked him to shut his mouth so that we could get on with business here.
That's no great shakes there, Tom. It's not.
Well, it's not. We set the four of us set the bar pretty low, anyways, in various ways. So we're good.
Humility here. Despite ourselves, there's some humility in the room.
Exactly.
Well, what a powerful process and experience you had, Herb. About, we've talked many times about the importance of being specific and really taking, ownership of that issue that was causing you so much grief and conflict. I mean, in your life, I have I think a unique position to understand the incredible suffering you had with that. I mean,
I'll take the mystery out of it. It was infidelity, and it was ruining my entire life in every aspect.
It was, and you were walking around just there was a phrase used called torn to pieces hood. And that's what you were, man. You were torn to pieces. You could not have any real peace of mind until you somehow dealt with that conflict inside of you. And, it's so interesting because I had such a very similar experience with the obsession to drink and use and even smoke cigarettes. They all were lifted at the same time for me, right around the same time. And it was really, when I look back at it, it was exactly what you're talking about. I got to the point where I could really see it was time to change this behavior. And it wasn't just a result of my incredible intelligence or awareness or anything. I mean, it really was a result of the suffering. Is that I got to the point where I was really honest about the pain I was in. And, that phrase about being sick and tired of being sick and tired, I knew what that felt like. So, I really appreciate you being so open and vulnerable about that. And I hope it inspires some people here to be that honest with themselves about what's going on. You've got to name it if you're going to heal it. You got to name it. And so many people, I'll never forget Dr. Garrett O'Connor. He was just a very gift to psychiatry, to the recovery community. He was for many years the medical director at the Betty Ford Center and stuff like that. I went to a workshop he did in Santa Monica for the International Doctors in Alcoholics Anonymous. And he gave this whole presentation. At the beginning of the presentation, he said, with all the guys in here that are in recovery, will you raise your hands if you went to a massage parlor and got a happy ending? So there's 300 doctors in the room, right? About 10 guys raise their hand, right? 10 guys raise their hand. He gives this talk about honesty and stuff like that. At the end of it, he says, all right, now that I've talked to you guys about getting out, how many of you, 10 guys didn't raise their hand? And I mean, it was a remarkable thing that there's so much difficulty and shame in admitting certain things that have happened in our past or even in our current life, in our recovery. And I'm telling you, when you share like this, man, you really open the door for people to take a look at it. So I wanted to just start out with an appreciation, and you demonstrated, you modeled the first part of this step, humbly asked, right? to have these shortcomings removed. And you really did that. I mean, that's the other thing here, is that I think the importance of this step is also in letting ourselves be directed. And it's so hard for us to do that. I know it was hard for me to do that, to let go and to not try to be the master of my own fate and all that other nonsense I had in my head about what it meant to be a man and all those other things. And you know, this step is one of those great things that so many things are happening at so many levels in it, right? It's reinforcing the importance of humility. And we know that in terms of Bill underscoring it like you did today about that's part of the definition of emotional sobriety. Yeah. And is having humility in relationship with ourselves, with our fellows, with life itself, and with the God of our understanding. So it's a cornerstone to this whole thing. And be willing to say, I need help. That's it. It was very hard. Roger knows this. Roger was with me at a time in my life when I went through an incredible, personal crisis in 2004. And, Roger and I had a couple other real close friends, and they said to me, Al, we hate to see you in so much pain, but we're so glad to see you being able to ask for help and to let us into your life and let us be important to you. Is to be able to give you something because you're given all the time. And it was a real important moment in my life. I'll be forever grateful for Roger and all the other folks that were there to support me during that. But so I will turn this over to Raj, and then we'll have Thom be cleanup batter tonight.
Okay. Well, thank both of you. Your line, don't know how it works, but I know that it works. Really resonates for me, particularly for me with regard to the self-esteem piece. And as I've mentioned before, I moved out here from the Midwest in order to undertake therapy for myself with Nathaniel Brandon back in 1972, and spent, I can't remember exactly, two to 3 years in his group therapy. And then a few years later, I went back again for another year or two. But that's a great way to say it with regard to all of the practices he identifies for in the 6 pillars of self-esteem, along with willingness. Don't have to know how it works to know that it works.
Yes.
And also that it doesn't work perfectly. Okay. That is a process, right? And often it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, sometimes 1 step forward, 2 steps back. But over time, with willingness and perseverance, it's forward movement, right? It's forward movement. You mentioned, Herb, about tying together us discusses tying together the step 7 with some of Brandon's concepts about self-esteem. And I want to do a few readings from the 12 and 12 on step 7, and then a couple of readings from Nathaniel's writings. And I'm doing this because I want people to notice commonalities, right? I want people to notice commonalities between what Bill is so articulately, from my point of view, expressing in the 12 and 12, and then also Nathaniel in his writings doing much the same thing. Rather than focusing on the humility piece, which I'll talk more about next week, I'm going to focus tonight on the character building piece, which Bill also gives quite a bit of attention to in the 12 and 12. He writes with regard to looking at character. In all these strivings, and he's talking about the strivings of alcoholics to get their needs met, their instinctual needs and their materialistic needs, primarily is what is he referencing. In all these strivings, we had lacked perspective to see that character building and spiritual values had to come first. Now I want to read that again. In all these strivings, and then he continues in the next sentence, we had lacked the perspective to see that character building and spiritual values had to come first, and that material satisfactions were not the purpose of living. Quite characteristically, we had gone all out in confusing the ends with the means. Instead of regarding the satisfaction of our material desires as the means by which we could live and function as human beings, we had taken these satisfactions to be the final end and aim of life. When I read a bit from Nathaniel in a couple of minutes, remember those words. True, most of us thought good character was desirable, but obviously good character was something one needed to get on with the business of being self-satisfied, right? Satisfied at the material and instinctual level. After all, with the proper display of honesty and morality, we'd stand a better chance of getting what we really wanted, right? At a more base level. But whenever we had to choose between character and comfort, the character building was lost in the dust of our chase after what we thought was happiness. Seldom did we look at character building as something desirable in itself, something we would like to strive for, whether our instinctual needs were met or not. We had never thought of honesty, tolerance, and true love of man and God as the daily basis of living. He goes on to speak more about character building, but in the interest of time, let me go to a few comments Nathaniel makes when he's writing about self-esteem and in the process of living consciously. Remember, I read a bit of this last week as well. Nothing is more common than to pursue self-esteem by means that will not and cannot work. Instead of seeking self-esteem through consciousness, responsibility, and integrity, we may seek it through popularity, material acquisitions, and sexual exploits. So here the commonality there. He's talking about the importance of character. Just Bill's using different terminology, but it's exactly the same content as far as I'm concerned. And he goes on to say, self-esteem is an intimate experience that resides in the core of one's being. It is what I think and feel about myself, not what someone else thinks or feels about me. This simple fact cannot be overemphasized. I can be loved by my family, my mate, and my friends, and yet not love myself. I can be admired by my associates and yet regard myself as worthless. I can project an image of assurance and poise that fools almost everyone, and yet secretly tremble with the sense of my own inadequacy. I can fulfill the expectations of others, yet fail my own. And he goes on to give other examples of that. The acclaim of others does not create self-esteem. Neither does erudition, material possessions, marriage, parenthood, philanthropic endeavors, sexual conquest, or faceless. These things can sometimes make us feel better about ourselves temporarily or more comfortable in particular situations, but comfort is not self-esteem. And Bill uses that language explicitly. I'll try to reference that next week in the same chapter. If we're seeking comfort, it's not going to serve us in the process of character building, right? If that's our primary objective. The tragedy of many people's lives is that they look for self-esteem in every direction except within, and so they fail in their search. In this book, we shall see that positive self-esteem is best understood as a spiritual attainment. I want to say that again. In this book, we shall see that positive self-esteem is best understood as a spiritual attainment. That is, as a victory in the evolution of consciousness, of our individual consciousness. So I hope those excerpts convey a sense of, even though different language is being used, there is so much shared wisdom among the 12 steps and Brandon's work on self-esteem. And I'll leave it at that for tonight and take some of those ideas further next week.
Thank you, Raj.
Thanks, Raj.
Cool. Spiritual attainment. Going through this stuff, and this, I mean, this, and I don't think I'm the only one of the four of us. I think it's probably, this is true for all of us, is every time we're going through these 12 steps with a different angle, a little bit different angle on this stuff, I'm experiencing the 12 steps in really new ways, and sometimes very radically new ways, and seeing just there really is. I feel like literal enlightenment, like things are lighting up. You guys were shining lights on things that it's almost like, hey, look, have you ever looked at it from this angle? And we're all just poking around and going like, oh fuck, man, that's really cool. And so here's the I've this time through step 7 becomes like really important to me because I'm not the only guy in this group of many people here, of 150 folks or so, that I always think that I have to be doing something, and if something's got to be done, I got to be doing it. And then being proactive is an important thing. It's like, I don't want to sit around and act like wait for somebody to do it for me, but it's a bigger challenge for me to be still. And for me, step 7 brings me to that place of being still, which is, I notice, I know when I talk about this, I even slow down my usual fast talking, but it's because I begin to have trouble finding the exact words I want, because when I'm being still, it's really not about words. And in this step says, so what I'm thinking, what am I doing? Okay, what do I got to do? Humbly ask him to remove our shortcomings. All I'm doing is I'm stepping into this space and I'm asking something. I'm not responding. I'm not doing it. I'm asking. To me, this is the step where it is about expansion. It's about spiritual enlightenment. It's where we make ourselves available. And the way I put it, wrote it down a minute ago, is this is where I can discover there's more to me than just me. This is the broader my connection to all that is, all the greater stuff. And it doesn't have to be, we can all have our belief systems, but where I feel connected and where I really am in a place of receiving. So the idea is, a lot of people who teach about mantra stuff is that they'll often suggest you have a mantra that doesn't have meaning, but just has sound to it. But I like mantras that have a little bit of meaning. And one of my favorites is just the two words, be still. I just focus on be still. And because it's such a challenge for me, and not necessarily out here, but in here and in here. And so that's what this is for me. This is the place where I step into this place. I step through this threshold into this new space where I've just come from, I've just arrived from step 6, where I was becoming ready. I was becoming ready to have these shortcomings removed, and now I'm taking, it's a leap of faith. I'm asking them to be removed now, and I'm, the challenge is, the unknown is, how willing am I to change? Because sometimes we don't know until we know. It's like when I may discover and have discovered a lot of times when I think I'm willing for something, I feel new resistance rise up in me. And that's going to be part of the exercise of this, because I'm just going to sit and be still and be aware of my continuing to ask the question, asking for the removal of these shortcomings is also a practice. We talked about that, I think last time we went through this stuff is, it's not something you do one time. It's like any kind of letting go. You don't let go of something and then that's it, you dust your hands off. It's you let go, and then in a moment, you notice you're holding on to it again. So you put it back down, and then you notice, oh, it's in the other hand now. It's like, so I put it back down, and it's like, and that's what this is for me. I just keep putting it down. I've asked for something, and I'm going to be the keeper of the space. I'm going to be the keeper of that space of one of these places I call divine emptiness, where I know a lot more about what is not than about what I am not and what is not than what is. And I'm making a space for something new to come. And that's where I am. That's where I love about this particular step. And I realized that it's one of the reasons that when I was first introduced to 12 steps, I just skipped right past step 7, over and over and over and over again, because, thinking, oh, well, that's just kind of, it's just kind of stuck in there because they needed something between 6 and 8, and sure enough, it's one of the bigger challenges for me, and I love it, and I'm doing it again. So thanks, guys.
Well, there's 2 things that just came into mind as you guys are sharing, and I want to take a minute to do that. Herb introduced me to Father Richard Rohr, and one of the guided meditations he would do is he had us sit in a circle, and he would say a line, and we'd have to repeat it. And he would say, start out with "Be still and know that I am God," and then we'd repeat that, and then he would shorten it. He'd go, "Be still and know," and then we'd sit there and we'd say that, and we'd sit with that for seemed like hours to me. It was probably a couple minutes, right? Then he would go, "Be still," and we'd sit with "Be still," and then his final one was "Be," and we'd sit with that. Powerful, man. It was just I love that. I love the centering of that, right, and to bring it home. But I wanted to read something I'm reading from Bob Earl's book called "I Got Tired of Pretending." And some of you may not know of Bob Earl, but he was really quite a force in recovery, especially in Southern California.
In the 80s, right?
In the 80s, right? And it really brought in family of origin work, and recovery. Was a adult child of alcoholics and in recovery. And he was in prison. He became a writer on the Perry Mason show. Very successful man. And enjoyed his recovery and had a lot of great things to share. But I want to read what this looks like when we're facing some of our shortcomings and we're doing the work that Herb was talking about earlier. And this is in his book, "I Got Tired of Pretending," as I mentioned. And he goes, "Adult children from alcoholic and dysfunctional families, codependents, need their heroes, their mates, and themselves to be perfect." Hear what that says. Why do we need them to be perfect? Because that creates the fantasy that somehow we'll be okay then, right? If somebody's perfect, they'll be everything we need them to be. If we're perfect, we'll be everything we should be, and then we'll be okay. That kind of idea. He goes, "When they find a flaw in a hero, they throw him or her away. Guess who else they throw away when they find a flaw in? Ourselves we throw away." He goes, "During my 9 years since I started therapy, I ended one relationship because the woman had too much sexual anger for me. And another ended because the woman was a compulsive shopper and on my money. I gave her a choice to get some help and to get some help with the compulsive shopping, to call it quits. She called it quits. The end of another relationship came when we knew we had been put together for a short time to help each other out. And that was the time. And then it was time to move on. She was the first to recognize that our time was over and that it was time to move on. During marriage number 6, so this was his 6th marriage, my mate became physically ill. His 2nd, I believe his 5th wife died from cancer. So this is his 6th wife, right? She became physically ill. After about 2 months, she came to me one day at dead and say, Bobby, I feel a lot of distance between us. He says this sarcastic. Now I always react like a mature adult when confronted. No, I think I said something like, how can you feel distance? I'm standing 2 feet in front of you. Right? Concrete, he takes it. She went on to tell me how she felt alone and felt as though I wasn't there for her. Being mature, I listed all the things I was doing, taking her to doctors, going to the pharmacy, going to the store, cooking, and so forth, right? Trying to convince her she was wrong. She pointed out that those were custodial chores. Oh, she was sharp. They were custodial chores. These were chores we could hire somebody to do. Wow. How do you escape that one, right? Now he's not. When confronted, I can always get in touch with what I feel. So I told her I was going to the other. Oh, he says, when confronted, I can't always get in touch with what I feel. So I told her I was going to go in the other room, and I respond as soon as I knew something about what was going on with me. What did he do? He lived in the pause. He created the pause, right? About 5 minutes later, I came back into the living room with tears in my eyes. I told her she was right. There was distance between us. I told her that the last time someone I cared about got sick, they died. I told her that a little guy inside didn't think he could take that kind of pain again. And he had put on his running shoes and took off when she got sick. And that's what she was getting from me, was the best and all that I had to give her at the moment. I told her if she needed more, she was going to have to look to her friends, to her sponsor, to her minister, to her therapist. He goes, for the first time in my life, I wasn't able to deliver what my mate needed, and I didn't have to hate her for that.
But he
Listen
was
to
honest with himself.
Yes, first time in his life, I wasn't able to deliver what my mate needed, and I didn't have to hate her. I didn't have to convince her that she wasn't feeling what she was feeling and didn't think I was fundamentally bad, inadequate, defective, unworthy, or not fully valid as a human being. There were 2 whole people standing in that room, one with needs and the ability to express them, and the other because of the pain of past experiences, knowing he couldn't fulfill them. I had come a long way. Now think about that, sometimes just owning it, owning what that shortcoming was, not doing what she wanted, but owning that he wasn't able to, at that moment, give that to her. Pretty inspiring, isn't it, when you hear him talk about it that way? Yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that in so we can open things up now.
Beautiful.
Unless you guys want to comment on that. I mean, I do want to leave some space because that's pretty powerful, isn't it, what Bobby shared?
He was one of my heroes in my early recovery because he was so charismatic and passionate and real. It was wonderful,
Really was. I hear a lot of people criticize the 12 steps that they're old-fashioned. I can understand that criticism. They were written back in 1935. Some people that are agnostic have difficulty with the word God used in the steps. For me, I look at the process that's involved, the forces that the 12 steps generate are so powerful that I think they're ageless. There's this interesting phenomena that happens when you work the steps. They create a charge and then a discharge. The first step, we're powerless. Our life has become unmanageable. It creates this charge. We're in big trouble and we don't know what to do. And then step 2 comes along and it says we have hope. That charge, that existential crisis that we have is resolved. What's happening here is parallel to life. We charge ourselves when we breathe in. When we exhale, we discharge. That's the rhythm of life. And the way I love to think about the 12 steps, it's helping us get connected to the rhythm of life so we can learn how to show up in a good way.